podcast. With me today, we have Jim LaDue. Jim is the founder and president of Innovative Waste Strategies, a Massachusetts-based advisory and materials management firm specializing in the repurposing of industrial and commercial waste materials for beneficial reuse. With nearly 40 years of combined experience in waste and waste to value, Jim is a recognized leader in developing and implementing strategies that transform waste into valuable resources. Earlier in his career, he played a pivotal role as Chief Operating Officer for a startup, the first of its kind to convert waste into an engineered alternative fuel, AEF, used to replace coal in cement kilns, paper mills, and utility power plants to produce heat and power. In that role, he led the company's national expansion, overseeing market analysis, site selection, construction, and commissioning of new AEF manufacturing facilities, as well as securing key offtake contracts. Today, Jim works across the entire value chain, partnering with industrial and commercial waste generators, waste-to-fuel processors, and end users of AEF, including some of the world's largest cement producers, to design and implement beneficial use in landfill avoidance programs. He is also a trusted consultant to major private equity and consulting firms seeking expertise in waste-to-fuel markets, sustainability, and circular solutions. So thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So let's get started with, could you tell us a little bit more about your background in waste and waste to value?
Sure. So about almost 40 years ago, I got involved in the waste industry working for a private company out in the western part of Massachusetts where I originate. And I spent about 15 years with that company. It was a privately held company, but it was a large waste service provider. And it was great because it provided me an opportunity to be exposed to all aspects of the waste service industry at that time. After spending 15 years with that company, I ended up joining BFI, which today is Republic Services. And I worked with them for a short period of time before I left to start my own company, which ultimately I sold to Waste Management in 1999 and spent 5 years with them. And in 2004, I left the quote unquote waste services industry. And that's when I joined 3 other partners, and we started a company that was involved in converting industrial waste into an alternative engineered fuel. And I spent about just under 20 years with that company, which was ultimately acquired by private equity, but had the opportunity to design, build, commission, and operate 3 plants, one in the western part of Massachusetts, one in the Midwest, and one in the Southeast. So I think the thing I'm probably most grateful for, in addition to all the wonderful people I got to work with and meet, was who I got to become through those years, because I was exposed to so many different aspects of waste handling, waste treatment, waste transport, recycling, to industrial manufacturing, converting waste materials into a fuel product, spending time at cement plants, sitting in the control room while they were trial burning our fuel product, sitting in the control room in paper plants, utility power plants. I've been through every inch of a power plant. There's just so much that I was able to. I'm very grateful because I was given access to people and places that I normally would have never ventured in my wildest dreams. And so it was a really robust, unusual, and valuable educational period of my life for those 40 years, from 1986 until 2020, when I started IWS. And all of those years, that's one long education, but boy, was it a wonderful education. And as I said, I'm really grateful for all of the things, people and places that I've got to meet, be, and participate, but it prepared me to be able to bring value to industrial manufacturing companies at a level I would have never imagined. And sometimes I get humbled because I'm reminded by our customers just about how vast experience that we have. So I always will remain humble, but again, sometimes you forget about that educational aspect of all those years. What seemed routine and fundamental, definitely it's, again, I think what I'm belaboring it, but I just spent a lot of years traveling on this road that I didn't really predestine. And a lot of turns and byways that I traveled were just opportunities that thankfully I took advantage of them. So that's kind of how I wind up where I am today.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's so interesting that you started a company that was doing something that nobody else was doing before. So would you say that there was maybe one specific event or a tipping point that really made you go down this route, or did you see a need for it?
When I was in the waste industry, I was managing industrial waste streams for manufacturing companies. I was managing nickel plated sludge out of a company that manufactured and plated pen clips. And I became to know the owner of that company pretty well. And he reached out to me one day out of the blue and said, I'm going to start a company. It's a long story, but I'll make it short. I'm going to start this company. We're going to make fuel out of waste materials, and I'd like you to be a part of the company. And what they were doing was the University of Massachusetts College was looking to replace coal, that they had a power plant on their site that used to burn coal to produce heat and hot water. And this individual was already tinkering around with the idea of making these fuel cubes out of waste materials that had the same energy value as coal, but much cleaner. And that's how it all started. And when he reached out to me, at first I thought the guy was crazy, but it wouldn't leave my thoughts. It just kept circling around in my thoughts, and I thought, wow, this is really awesome. So I actually, at that time, I was working with a large publicly held waste company, who I mentioned earlier, and I brought it to the market area VP and said, there's this guy that's doing something that I think is pretty forward thinking and something we might want to know about. And the response I got wasn't favorable because the company had a large portfolio of disposal assets, landfills and things like that. And my initial objective was to try to align with this fella and give us a competitive advantage against the other waste service companies. And when that didn't appear to be something that was going to be materialized, I said, all right, well, I'm going to jump. I'm going to take the jump. Now you have to understand, my family has been, by our choice, a single income family. We made a choice way early on to have my wife raise our daughters, and she was good enough to give up her career to let me keep mine. When I made that choice to jump, I was in a very admirable position from all aspects, financially and otherwise. And I left. It took a massive pay cut, forewent all my benefits, and did everything with 2 young children and a wife, all relying on me. I think back to that sometimes, and I said, I never viewed myself as an entrepreneur because I honestly never thought of myself as having the courage that an entrepreneur requires to go out and do something. But when I think back on that, I go, what was I thinking, right? But it resonated with me. It was just something that I felt, man, what this could be. And so when I started there in 2004, I never had a day there where I said, what did I do? I never had a day of regret or anything. There was, a lot of requirements I never anticipated, one of which was the only time I'd ever been on an airplane was on my honeymoon, and I had to get Valium to get on that airplane. And one of the things I had to do was to get over my fear of flying, because I'd flown all over the United States. And so that was one of the first things I had to do, was to overcome my fear of flying. But that was when I got into that space. It wasn't a space, and we were under constant threat from the Massachusetts DEP that we were running an illegal disposal site, and the financial threats. And we actually re-engineered a whole new culture at the regulatory level, not just at the state level, but also all the way up to the US EPA. What we did was absolutely remarkable, unimaginable, quite frankly. And the industry exists today largely because of the four of us that really believe. We never thought it was going to turn into what it did, but it was a remarkable ride. And again, most grateful was who I became through the process, someone I would never otherwise would have become. Not saying anything other than I've learned to recognize that I've done things that I would have never imagined I would or could do. And then I have done successfully.
That's an amazing story. So thank you for sharing all of that. So yeah, the entrepreneur journey when you go off on your own and build something that doesn't exist is scary, but also rewarding too.
Yeah, it was, I definitely never doubted. And I think that was probably no pun intended, that's probably the fuel that kept me going, was I never doubted it. It was just such an incredible, when you think about waste materials and that we were burying, the globe is only so big, it's never going to get bigger. The real estate in our world has already been established. What is getting larger exponentially is population. And when you think about the amount of waste that we generate, you think about what we do with it. In my mind, we were burying waste in landfills for almost 20 years when I was in the waste industry. And here's this guy that says, hey, I'm going to turn this waste into a product that can be used to repurpose, to replace fossil fuels. Again, I thought the guy was out of his mind when he first told me the idea, but after that, I was like, there's no way this can't work, because this is such a brilliant, it solves so many problems. And of course, you didn't get the buy-in right away from everybody, but today, these types of industries are very well established throughout North America. And of course, over in Europe, they've been doing things like this for 20 years before we ever thought of it. So today it's a different, it would be hard for somebody to imagine what it was like back then. Companies today realize that they don't have to bury their waste in landfills or burn it in incinerators. Back then, when you would approach a company with, I remember the most entertaining was the site, you do what? You're going to do what with my waste? People never heard of it back then.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an educational process that needed to happen because there was always that trailing liability, cradle to grave. And so when we first started talking to companies about it, they were enamored, but they were also skeptical and a little concerned. So today it's not like that. Companies, it's commonly known that their waste materials may in fact have a beneficial reuse value. What is not known is how do we get that? How do we implement that at our facility? There's a starting point and an end point, but the infrastructural requirements that are there to put the start point connected to the end point is where there's a lot of challenges today. Even with the companies that are in the space that are processing waste materials, we often get retained to help either from a consulting advisory standpoint or as a contractor standpoint to help put that together by some of the larger materials processing companies that are out there.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I know the whole linear manufacturing, cradle to grave, it's more so circularity and cradle to cradle now. So I think a lot of companies, whether they just want to do good, have certain requirements. And I think what IWS does, you solve that solution where you help them reach their sustainability, their environmental goals, waste reduction, because you're finding an alternative. And for listeners that maybe aren't quite sure of AEF or engineered alternative fuel, what that is exactly, maybe could you explain a bit more how that's produced, what that looks like for listeners?
Sure, that's a great question. So alternative engineered fuel, the key word is engineered. It's not a random composition of waste that just gets bundled up and sent to an industrial process like a cement kiln or a lime kiln, which are very, very popular users of these types of fuels. it's manufactured to a specification that produces, and I'll say this in layman's terms so everybody can understand it. It's manufactured so that its behavior is characteristic of traditional fossil fuel, whether it be coal, natural gas, oil. It has to behave the same way. It can't have variability in it. It needs to have the same moisture level, which needs to be low. It needs to have the same heat value all the way through, which needs to be very dense. As an example, there's different grades of coal, but on an average, the heat value realized from combusting coal is around 10,000 BTUs or British thermal units. It's an energy measure. So these fuels have to have a comparable heat value in order for it to be considered to replace coal. So it's manufactured on a specification. To make that fuel, you have to understand the raw materials that you're using to make the fuel. So that's why all of the material streams that you bring into a facility that are sourced from a generator, there's a robust materials assessment that's completed analytically through lab methods. So you understand all of the chemical and physical characteristics of these materials that you want to incorporate into your raw material mix. So it's a very robust and thorough process utilized to manufacture this fuel product. That part is really not known even by the companies that are participating in these programs where their waste is being taken away and used as a feedstock to make the fuel. You're making a fuel product that it better produce a result consistent, reliably, and uninterrupted, because if you all of a sudden, if you're delivering, as an example, cement kilns, they combust, an average cement kiln combusts maybe 12 to 15 tons an hour, 24 hours a day of coal, a cement kiln using coal. There's different size cement kilns, but on an average, a typical cement kiln operation that produces about 1 million tons a year of cement, or what they call clinker, 12 to 15 tons an hour. So if you're going to replace that, your fuel is being fed into their kiln at a rate. If it's a 50% replacement, you're putting in maybe 6 to 7.5 tons an hour. Your fuel is continuously being fed in. Well, if all of a sudden there's variability in moisture, heat, you're going to cause a lot of problems, not just in the chemistry in the kiln and the temperatures in the kiln, but it's going to affect the product, the cement product. So it's not a random, hey, let's just compile all this waste together because it's got energy. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know what you're manufacturing, how you're manufacturing it, and you need to make it the same way all the time. So when I talked about some of the experience I was fortunate to gain, I understand what bad fuel does from the perspective of sitting in the control room at a cement kiln and seeing what bad fuel does. And bad fuel, I'm not referring to alternative engineered fuel. I'm talking about biomass or wood chips that showed up and it was high moisture, and they had to make all kinds of adjustments and so forth to stabilize the kiln. So that's what alternative engineered fuel is. It's an engineered product manufactured on a tightly governed specification to replace traditional fossil fuels. So there's a lot that goes into it, but that's very simply what an engineered fuel product is.
And what are some of the waste products that are used to make the fuel? Just some examples.
So it's a broad base of materials that are utilized. One of the things that I'll speak specifically to what we've done, we've never used materials that could be recycled. As an example, uncoated paper. It can be recycled. You get a brown grocery bag, it can be turned into a brown grocery bag again. You get a shoebox. You buy products in a shoebox. That shoebox can become a shoebox again. We've always used materials that had no opportunity to be recycled. And examples of those materials are what they call multi-wall packaging. We work largely with label manufacturers that produce a multi-wall byproduct that can't be recycled, which is basically a silicone coated paper release liner, a paper or film-based label with adhesive on the back. That's why it's called, kind of a sandwich, right? You've got a few different substrates. You can't mechanically separate those from each other. Therefore, that's why they can't be recycled, and they would normally wind up in a disposal environment. Also in consumer packaging manufacturing, a lot of the food products that we purchase, a really good example is like a hot cocoa instant package. You have a paper envelope, but inside that paper envelope is laminated aluminum inner, and the aluminum is used to prevent the product. In some cases, these multi-wall substrates that they use are to prevent light from getting into the product to degrade the product. In many cases, they're what's called wet strengths, so that the moisture of the product can't degrade the packaging itself. And that's where you'll have like a plastic liner on a paper packaging, those types of things. So we find a lot of materials that are manufactured in consumer goods packaging, food packaging, label manufacturing, have a large universe of materials that just can't be recycled. And we extend the life cycle of those types of materials, by converting them into an engineered field product. So whenever you have a single piece of paper, a plastic, whenever it's maintained in its own universe and it's not laminated, coated, or put together with something else, usually there's a recycling opportunity for something like that. But once you put plastic to paper, film to paper, you laminate it, it becomes multi-wall. It's really difficult to do anything with those materials when they find themselves being disposed. And if you think about manufacturing in this company, there's also clothing manufacturers, and there are textile scraps that can be repurposed in, because a lot of clothing is largely polyester, which is a polymer-based material. So it's not just those materials or articles I talked about. There's others. We've used misprinted golf balls as a feedstock in the fuel, because you have a butadiene rubber core and you have a Surlyn plastic outer, and those have a real good energy value, and they don't have any hazardous associations with them. So there's a lot of things you can use, but basically, simply put, if it's clean, non-hazardous, has an energy value, and can be processed into a specific physical characteristic, it can be considered. So there's a lot of things out there that I didn't name that could be considered as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, those are definitely things I hadn't thought about, like clothing or a golf ball. So yeah. I know with more regulations coming out, I think you might see more business in that space, especially polyester, but that's a whole nother topic I won't get into. Plastic in your clothes. But thank you. I think that provided a really great tutorial for AEF, so people can really understand what that actually is. So I thank you for sharing all of that information.
My pleasure.
So with all of the work that you do, what would you say is like a takeaway you'd want people to have or to think about based on the work that you do and the business that you've created?
Well, this is going to be this. I'm going to be selfish and say, here's what I'm most grateful for in terms of the takeaway. I'm really grateful just to have had the experience that I've had to be where I am, to be able to do what I do. But the takeaway, I'm gonna give you the reason why I do what I do. It would be really difficult for somebody to do something for an extended period of time that's purely transactional. I think that the why is so important in what people do. Why do you do what you do? And if you do something just because you can be compensated well for it, or allows you to pay the bills, or allows you to get away from a house full of young kids that are highly dependent and screaming, and I've never felt that way, but there's a lot of different reasons why people leave their house in the morning. I have to say the biggest takeaway for me is in what I do is the indescribable feeling of someone's gratitude that you improved their situation, that you have produced a result that they didn't believe was producible. The feedback through the years that that not just myself, but even my colleagues that I partnered with, when somebody really goes out of their way to tell you how grateful they are and how much they appreciate what you did for them and how you changed. I'm not going to say any names, but recently we flew out to a very large manufacturing plant in the Midwest, and we went out there to put together a program that would get this company from sending their waste materials to a waste incinerator. And that wasn't the first facility for this company that we did this for. And we had done a few others. When we were leaving, we all shook hands and we departed for our respective airports. When we got to our airport and we saw this individual there, we didn't realize that he was flying out of the same airport to go home that we were. Because there's two airports that you could have gone in or out of. And he had some time. We were going to have lunch at the airport, my colleague and I, and he said, "Oh, well, I got time. Do you mind if I join you?" And I said, "I don't, not only do I not mind, I'd be delighted, please." And he told us, we were sitting there having lunch with him, and he got emotional. He started to choke up a little bit. He goes, "I just want you to know that I've been recognized in my organization to the extent that I just got a huge promotion, and it's because of what you guys have done for me." And, you know, I can't even tell you what that felt like. You go to work every day and you perform. There's a level of expectation and deserving that your customers have, and it's the right thing to do, is to give your best and to do your all, right? But to have somebody look at you and say, "You've changed the quality of my professional life because of what you've done," I didn't even know how to respond to that. I can tell you that that's not the first time that that's happened. And so my takeaway, and I know this is a long answer, but my takeaway is that what I do allows me to, I don't want to say I'm a life changer. I don't, that would be taking it a little bit beyond what's probably true. But when someone looks at you, a professional looks at you and they're emotional, pardon me, and they say, "I got a promotion because of what you did for me." I don't think there's ever anything that I'll ever accomplish or do in my career that will be as gratifying as that, because that means that you gave your best, but it also produced a result, and it isn't just income for you or accolade. It's, you actually improve somebody's position with their company, and they're giving you credit for that. And I sometimes I struggle sometimes to think that what we're doing is anything exceptional or special, but we learn often that it is exceptional, and it's not just a transaction. And I can't tell you how lucky I am to be able to have those types of things happen, because I spent many years giving my all and giving my best. And sometimes people, well, that's what I deserve. I'm the customer. And it's true. But every once in a while, you run into someone that says, "I've got a lot of experience working with different types of strategic partners, vendors, suppliers, however they want to term it." But sometimes you'll get, most recently, we had somebody say to us, "I can't believe how responsive your company is." Like, we reach out, it's like you get back to us right away. Those are things that I think you should do. But you hear sometimes you do something and you don't realize the impact it has on somebody from a human perspective. And I guess that's pretty awesome. It's not a transaction at that point. Now it's connection. And I love that. And if I could do that every day, I would. And I understand what it means for people to say, "I love what I do so much that if I could afford to do it for free, I would." I get that now. I get it.
That's amazing. So I think that what you do is so multifaceted because you're benefiting people and planet, right? So you're creating these great opportunities for businesses and people that work there, and then you're also solving a waste solution.
Yeah.
So I think that's really amazing. So thank you for going more in depth and sharing that story. And this goes a little bit into the next question I was going to ask, and you answered some of it already. But so with some of the businesses you've worked at, and you don't have to name any names, of course, what is some of the other impacts that you brought about from the work that you do? I know you talked about this amazing project with the company where their career was elevated. They had this massive change in waste solutions. Are there any other case studies you would like to talk about? And there's one in particular I'm hoping you answer, but
Well, there's quite a few. So if there's one specifically you're hoping I'm going to address, I might miss it. But we have had here. I'll give you one that you're not thinking of, and I can name the company. And I've never told you about this one, and I'd be happy to speak of the other one if but everybody's heard of the game manufacturer Milton Bradley. It was a large Milton Bradley was actually a real person's name, and that person was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, where Milton Bradley originated and where I'm from. And Milton Bradley was acquired by Hasbro Games, and Milton Bradley had a manufacturing plant in a suburb of Springfield, Mass. It was about 1.5 million square feet, really big manufacturing plant. And it was really hard to get in there because I'll go back to the days when we talked about the industry was different, where people were a little skeptical about what we said we were going to do with their waste. And we knew people in that company personally through our years in the waste industry, but it was tough to get in there. But when we got in there, we diverted about 100 tons a month of waste materials from going to the landfill. And we had to put this program together in a manufacturing plant where 6 different languages resided. Portuguese and Russian, Italian, English and Spanish. And the reason I bring that up is because we had to train all of these people, and not all of them spoke good English. And we put together a program in there. It was the most complex and complicated one we've ever done. Because again, this model isn't just about, hey, have your trash compactor come to our plant, and it doesn't work like that. That program that we put together for them, they won what they call an INI award. And INI is short for innovation. And they won it not just here in the US, it's a global award. And there's only one that's given out. And it's given out to the business unit anywhere that Hasbro Games operated globally, and they won it. It was a global award. They won it based on the program that we put together with them, and took 100 tons a month of their overall waste. We couldn't take all their waste streams. They made Play-Doh there and all kinds of stuff, but they won the award. It was a big deal. It's a huge reception celebration that takes place in New York, with a big gala that takes place. They won it based on our program. And that was a pretty good, if you will, case study of a program that was probably the most complex and complicated, but also probably the most recognized, because it was recognized globally, that we've ever partook in. And that was with the company that I started with 3 other fellas, back in 2004. I don't know if you want to help me a little bit with a case study specifically that you might be referencing. I'll excuse that I'm not sure which one you might be talking about. If you could reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that story, because I did not know that one. It's an amazing success story. But I was thinking about the one with the large paper roll that was on a plant floor for over a year.
Yeah,
so I thought that was a really good solution.
That was. So we were approached by a global manufacturer of label liner. And they had a challenge with these very large rolls of inventory that they had sitting on their floor for over a year. And the reason was because of their size. It took special handling they had special clamp trucks to handle these rolls, but trying to get somebody to handle the rolls that could pick them up from them and trying to find an end life solution for them. Landfills won't take large bulky items like that because they wreak havoc in the landfill, and you certainly can't take those to a waste incinerator because you'll just have a big charred roll in the ash pan at the end of the day. And they were trying to find somebody. They heard of us through an industry association, and they reached out to us. And when they asked us if we could help them, we told them we could. We put together a program where we took these rolls from two of their facilities, which at the end of the project ended up being three of their facilities. And we worked with one of our strategic partners to hydraulically cut these rolls. So we picked them up whole, we transported them to a preprocessor where they were hydraulically cut, and then they were reloaded into shipments that were sent to the processing facility that then used it with other materials to produce an engineered fuel product. And we mitigated that problem for them. They said that they had a timeline and they wanted to have it done by the end of the calendar year so that they could get them off their books. But we came out much before then for them. We did that project. I want to say we finished it for them in about as quickly as they could load the trucks and get them out. We took care of it for them. So we completed what they viewed as a very difficult, problematic process for them in a very impressive time frame that exceeded their expectations. And again, it's just one of those things that I like the statement when I've heard someone say, and I heard it a long time ago and I use it, I don't even know what I don't know. And I guess that just goes to what these folks didn't know was that there is a solution out there, and it's not a complicated one. It's just they didn't know about it. And if they run into something like that again, they're going to know exactly, who to call. And I will say there's not a lot of companies out there that do that, but it's not by any means this obscure solution. The problem was they didn't want to dispose of them. They wanted them destroyed. They didn't want them resold. They didn't want them exported. But the disposal solutions that are, the commodity disposal solutions of landfilling and incineration weren't going to work for them. So it just took a step in the middle to convert the material characteristics to such that they could be sent to a processing facility to be manufactured into an engineered fuel, and that's what we did.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think another thing too with waste to energy versus AEF is that waste to energy, you still have the ash byproduct of burning it that goes to landfill, where AEF is completely landfill avoidance. So I think that's amazing too, just to point out for people to understand the processes. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's the one I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's a great. I'd like to add on to that because Stephanie, that's a wonderful and significant point you brought up. So waste to energy is a disposal transaction. Waste incineration is purpose designed to reduce waste volume to preserve landfill space. That process creates steam as a byproduct. That steam is captured and pressurized and sent through a pipe under high pressure to spin a turbine, which produces electricity. The takeaway that a lot of folks had or has is that, well, if we send our waste to this incinerator, we're producing electricity. Well, you are, but you're also sending about 20 to 25% of your waste to the landfill in the form of toxic ash. What we do is not waste to energy, it's waste to value, it's repurposing it, to your point, what you just said. And I wanted to touch on that there's one of our customers is a global manufacturer, and they were going waste to energy and they thought they were landfill free. And we helped them understand that we're not advocating for or against incineration. We have a better model. We absolutely have a better model. But we were surprised that they thought that they were not sending waste into landfills because there is the ash. And in cement manufacturing, the ash becomes part of the raw material mix. So there is no byproduct. There is no ash that gets sent anywhere. As a matter of fact, cement kilns purchase boiler ash from coal-fired power plants as a raw material substitute. Well, why can't you take the ash from a waste incinerator? Well, because the characteristics physically and chemically don't work. There's a lot of reasons why that ash has to go to a landfill. They have ash landfills, ash dumps, and things like that for that ash. So we again, we aren't promoting or we're not for or against. It's just, it is what it is. We helped one of our customers realize that if they're going to an incinerator, they're not landfill free. And this is a company that is committed to becoming landfill free as any customer that we have in our portfolio. So, that was a surprise to us and to them as well. And so they're reducing their usage of waste incinerators because they really do want to get to be the zero landfill. Some of their facilities are there now, but not all of them.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that more. I think that's a really important thing to point out because, as you mentioned earlier too, we don't know what we don't know. And I think a lot of companies think it's great to do WTE and it is less bad, but it does still create this waste. And when companies are diving deeper and want to get zero waste certified, for example, all of that will become very transparent. And if they want that 90% diversion rate to get that certification, they have to do AEF. They have to do something more than what is traditionally provided. So I think all of those factors really are brought to life once they're going down that route where they want to be as much or want to defer as much from landfill as possible. So
yeah, and it's an interesting thing. It seems the universe works a certain way, whether we want to agree with it or not. And to your point, it seems that the more committed someone becomes, whether it's an individual, what we call champion in an organization, or whether it's the organization itself, when you make a commitment to achieve something, it just seems that it always works out that you find a way to get there, not just intentionally, but sometimes accidentally. It just seems that if you really commit to doing something, if you can't find the way, we don't know what we don't know, the way just seems to find you. And it's interesting, but I've got a lot of experience in my years to suggest that that's true. The commitment's the big part. If you're committed to something, you're going to get there. You just are. You might not have the plan, but the plan will just somehow, it just seems to. I'm not a big fan of randomness, like, hey, I want to be this or do that, and I'm just going to sit by and talk about mantras or doing it. No, but I mean, when you're committed to do something, you're asking questions, you're talking to people, and there's nothing greater than somebody else's network. And it just seems that when you're committed to something, again, this example I gave, these people, this organization, they walk the walk. They do. They invest heavily financially into these goals. They're as committed as any of our customers. And they thought that they got there. And then they discovered that they got partially the way there. And then now that they know, they have a clearly defined pathway, and that's what they're working on. So, it's interesting. It's interesting what we, one of the things that's out there is how marketing is presented. And I think the former Covanta did one of the most remarkable marketing jobs I've ever seen, because people felt that by going to Covanta, they were landfill free and they were converting their trash into energy. Well, I guess you could say that, right? But again, there's the entire story is, well, yeah, there's a byproduct, and it's by the way, brilliant model. I think it's brilliant. And I think incinerators have their place. I don't view it as the best. I don't view it as the best economic, environmental model, but I think what it does. It does what it's designed and intended to do. And I also think that instead of allowing energy just to escape, capture it and convert it into something. I think it's brilliant what they do, because years ago they didn't do that. So, but again, it's not zero landfill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big point we want to highlight. And Jim, I feel like you're doing such an excellent job with these questions. You almost answered my next question. I feel like you need to have your own podcast. But I know, so my next question actually is, what would be your message to listeners on how they can make an impact? And I feel like what you just talked about before about just having commitment to something is a really good answer for that. So if there's anything else you want to add for listeners or elaborate on that more?
I'm so glad you asked that way. There's two types of mindsets. You're interested or you're committed. And I will talk about the companies we work with. I find that the companies that are interested don't often get to where they want to go. And the reason I know that is because they reach out to us and ask us to work with them. And in many cases, they don't get to where they want to go. And that's because somewhere along the pathway, something arrives that they have to adjust their decision or they have to adjust their direction. However, companies that are committed, in 100% of the cases, every single one of them companies achieved their or exceeded what they set out to do. And that's in 100% of the cases. The companies that we work with that are interested, some of them get there, some of them don't, for different reasons. But the companies that are committed and dedicated, they always get there or beyond. That's our experience irrevocably and not in every case.
That's perfect. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. So now for a few fun questions so we can all get to know you a bit more. So in addition to all of the amazing work projects you have with clients, are there any hobbies or interests that you love to do that keep you grounded and a bit of a separation from work?
Sure. So I putter around golfing. I live on Cape Cod now, and I bring that up because as it relates to golfing, I used to get together with friends and colleagues every weekend, and none of us were ever going to be on tour, but we just liked getting together and getting out and playing golf. And I really, really enjoyed that. And when I moved to the Cape about 10 years ago, I moved about 3 hours away from that network. And I probably, in the 10 years I've lived here, I probably played golf maybe a half a dozen times. So I discovered that it really wasn't even the golf I enjoyed as much as it was the interaction with the people. But I really, if I get invited to go play around with my son-in-law, or a matter of fact, one of the friends that I had that lived in our neighborhood where I was from just moved here to the Cape, the next town over. So I might be picking up the golf clubs a little more frequently. I really like to play guitar. I've been playing guitar since I've been 12 years old. I'm not saying this to be humble. I'm really bad at it. My brain and my fingers struggle to coordinate, but I find a lot of peace in doing it. And I'll turn on YouTube and take a lesson on YouTube, and then I'll commit to learning to play a song. And most recently, I learned to play Steve Miller's Big Old Jet Airliner. And I really am bad, but I like to do that. I like to play guitar. And one of the things I've always enjoyed doing is landscaping, whether it's hardscaping. I've done a lot of patio building and sidewalk building and brick steps and things like that for friends through the years. I will tell you humbly, I'm really good at it. I could do it for a living, but of course, at 61 years old and 4 back operations later, that wouldn't be wise. But I love to tinker around in my yard. Spend a lot of time with my best friend, who is my wife. We work in the yard a lot. I will not take any credit for the lush vegetation that we have in our yard. It's literally park-like. We have an incredible display of hydrangeas and daylilies, and I'm one of those people that can look at something somebody else built and appreciate it. We have an incredibly wonderful landscape here. We have a very small lot that we live on. When we moved from Connecticut here, we downsized. But I love spending time out in the yard. We have a state forest that we walk to right next to us. We walk our dog. And we almost could walk to the beach, but we drive to the beach, which is a couple miles away year round. We walk our dog on the beach during the off season. So I'm more about just kind of appreciating all the things that when you're younger, you never really appreciate. You want to be, those are the things that, why would someone want to do that? Well, now I know why. I'm at peace. I enjoy it. I appreciate. I feel very privileged and blessed to live where I live, and it gives me time to spend time with my wife. And as I said, we got our little pet, and I'm doing the things I like to do, tinkering, putting around. I don't have to be anywhere. I don't have to meet anybody. And then I saved the best for last. My daughter, son-in-law, my 3 grandchildren live about 3 miles away from us. So we get together with them all the time. They're always here. They love being over at Gigi and Papa's house. And we love spending time with them. I often tell my wife, I can't believe how lucky we are that our adult children want to hang around with us. We have 2 daughters. Our youngest one is 30. She's getting married next year to a wonderful young man. So really, it's just about family. Our kids, for some reason, think we're cool enough to hang out with us. We vacation together every year. We live on the Cape. We go to vacation on the Cape. We rent a big house somewhere on the Cape. We all get together, and it's just madness for a week. I got my grandkids have as much energy as anyone I could ever imagine. They're 7, 6, and 4, and they're maniacs. But I just really enjoy that's what I do. Those are my hobbies, my family, and tinkering. And then once again, trying to play the guitar. I used to trick everybody. I would learn just enough of a song so where someone could guess it, and I'd move on to the next song. So they thought I had this whole library of songs, and the reality was I couldn't play one full song.
Well, I'm sure better than me. I can only play Smoke on the Water. That's it.
That was the first song that most of us learned.
I'll stick to the flute and the oboe.
There you go.
But very fun. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. So another fun question. Do you have a personal mantra or theme song, maybe a quote that gets you into a good mindset?
Nobody's ever asked me that. That's a really good question. I'm very, what's the word? I am very character to me is a really big deal. And I think you should always show up as yourself. And the amount of energy that people spend trying to please everybody else, it must be exhausting. And I'm sure we've all done it. Culturally speaking, all you got to do is watch awards shows and how people dress and the lengths that they go to show up to meet an expectation, right? I think something that is important, and if you talk about a mantra or a statement or a philosophy or something that motivates me or charges me, is probably what I tell. I coach and mentor some young professionals that found me on LinkedIn, and I always tell them, and a lot of what I tell them is when people ask me, like, how do you know this or how do you know? It's because I made mistakes. I've made so many mistakes. I've made more mistakes than almost anybody I know. And I don't always learn from making that mistake the first time or the second. So I always say, I'll never make the same mistake 3 times. But I always tell people, God created you to be you. He didn't create you to be me or anybody else. And you need to show up as you, because you've got things about you that are incredible that you're depriving people from if you don't show up being yourself. So I think the things that drive me is, I tell everybody, Wayne Gretzky famously said, it is provable beyond a shadow of a doubt that you will miss every shot you fail to take. There's so much wisdom packaged in that statement. But you got to show up too to take the shot. So what Wayne said was amazing, but I add to that, you got to show up in order to take the shot. If you show up and you don't take the shot, then you missed that opportunity. But some people are afraid to even show up. So I tell people, look, everybody has fears. Everybody is imperfect, and everybody has doubts, and they've got that voice chattering in their ear. You're not good enough. You're not tall enough. You're not smart enough. Don't listen to that voice. I tell people, just show up. That's half the battle. And then just be yourself. And so I think the thing that drives me the most is what I tell everybody. I've told that to every single young professional that I've coached and mentored. Never miss an opportunity to show up. Always show up as yourself. And I think that's important. And I don't know if you want to, if it's a mantra or if it's a motivating statement, but that's probably the thing that runs through my mind and out vocally from me probably most often, because I've said it to so many people and I live it. And I know one thing, most of my life, I was a people pleaser trying to please everybody. I can't tell you how exhausting that was. I know I can't please everybody. I know I can't please everybody today, but I will tell you this, as a people pleaser from a personality standpoint, you now understand why when that fella told me about his promotion and when his career took a different turn because of what we've done for him, you can understand why that moved me the way it did. That was awesome. But I don't show up trying to please everybody anymore. If you don't like me, I guess it's nothing that I did wrong, hopefully. And if it is, then I'll apologize. If it's not, then that's on you. Show up. Don't be afraid to show up, and always be yourself.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's so important to take action. So I always say more doing to try to accomplish something or try, because along the way you're collecting data and intel. And even if it doesn't work out, you're able to create a better life because of that experience. So
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I can promise you that there's not another one of you anywhere on the planet. There's not. And if you don't show up being Stephanie, then you've deprived those people of the incredible miracle of Stephanie. And this isn't to get spiritual, it's factual, it's biological. There's only one of you. And, you know, all of your thoughts and dreams and aspirations and all these things that make you up, there's not another one like you. So if you don't show up, or if you show up and you try to emulate somebody else, then you deprive those around you of experiencing you. It's true. That's really what you've done. And then you're practicing being somebody else and you're not being authentic to yourself. By the way, you're talking to a PhD graduate. I'm trying to please people right here. So I don't want to be viewed as a hypocrite here. I'm telling you, I told you I made a lot of mistakes. Those are some of them. And I didn't make up what I just told you. I had somebody much smarter than me tell me that, and I thought about it, and it made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you so much for sharing that. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. So another fun question, are there any books or podcasts you'd recommend to listeners?
I am a voracious reader, and I'm in the Bible every day. That's my favorite book. 66 books, actually. I love to read books on self-improvement, whether it be how to improve your golf game, whether it be how to play the guitar better, whether it be how to interact. One of my favorite all-time books was by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I've never been one that struggled in relationships, but hey, if you're interested, you can always get better. I've always liked what Tim Ferriss, he just took a whole different spin on things. I've read just about everything he's put out, listened to his podcasts. So, it's one of those things where I talked about when you travel down a road and you meet more people, you learn more things, and it's the same thing with books. And today we're lucky. Well, some people may call it cursed instead of blessed, but you buy a book on Amazon and hey, if you like this, have you thought about this book? So, but I don't read fiction, and I read a lot of books on history. I read a lot of biographies. I read a lot on, just how we started here. We're a very young country here in the United States. We're a very young country. And how the United States started and how we got to be where we are today is an incredible story and so unlikely. If anybody took the time to read the history of this country, it's a miracle that the United States exists at all. So yeah, I just love to, while I was in school, I wasn't a real big fan of learning. I was a big fan of social interactions and sports. And therefore, I didn't graduate the top of my class. I made the top half possible. But I'm a voracious reader. I love to learn about interesting people, about our country, other countries. And so most of what I ingest, whether it be on a podcast or reading in a book or something, for years when I had a long commute to work, there was never the radio. There was always books on tape. And I'm dating myself because if you said to somebody books on tape, they're like, what's that? But yeah, just that's a lot of what I've absorbed. I've always something that I read a lot today about health. I think that's what happens when you get into your 60s. You start reading about how to last into your 90s or better, right? So that's a lot of what I ingest, really. I probably deprive myself. There's probably some great fiction out there, but I'm a true story guy. If I go to the movies, I go to movies based on a true story. It just seems that those are the things that really move me the most, to want to spend the time to read or listen.
Thank you for sharing that. So definitely relate.
Yeah.
And lastly, how could listeners reach you if they want to connect or drop you a message?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. And so if they look for Jim LaDue on LinkedIn, I'll pop up. And I have a website, www.iwstrategy.com. And if you become part of my inner circle, which is very large, I am not at all reluctant to give out my cell phone number as well. I like to be easily reachable, and I'll add to that, I don't answer the phone because I think there might be $1 attached to it. I'm a very giving person. I coach and mentor a lot of young people. I spend a lot of time doing it. And the reason I do it is because I like to give back. I had a lot of people that put up with me for a lot of years and helped me and were generous with me and coaching me. So I definitely am indebted to those people and forever will be. And so I'm not hard to reach.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing all of your valuable information from your years of experience, what you're working with companies and everything. So I think you provide a lot of value for listeners that they can understand the industry a bit more. And I thank you so much for your time.
Well, I appreciate your time too. And thanks a lot for having me.